It was October 13th, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle received an envelope. Inside was a piece of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt, torn from his lifeless body just 2 nights before. The letter bore the now familiar scrawl of a killer who called himself Zodiac. It read, "I am the murderer of the taxi driver." To prove this, here is a piece of his shirt. This was not the first letter, and it would not be the last. For nearly a year, a faceless killer had haunted Northern California, striking without pattern, leaving behind broken bodies and cryptic clues. But it wasn't just the violence that gripped the public in terror. It was the voice, the words, the calculated cruelty sent to newsrooms and investigators alike. It began, as nightmares often do, with something that should have been harmless. 2 teenagers, their first date, a quiet stretch of road where couples went to be alone. David Faraday was 17. Betty Lou Jensen was 16. Both were model students, deeply involved in their schools and communities. David, an Eagle Scout. Betty Lou, an honor student. They had met only weeks before. December 20th, 1968, was their first official night out. At around 8:30 p.m., David picked Betty Lou up from her home. After spending time with friends, they drove to Lake Herman Road, a known lover's lane near Benicia, California. It was quiet, cold, and dark. The kind of place where nothing ever happened, until it did. Sometime before 11 p.m., someone approached their car. 10 copper-coated Super X shell casings were later found, scattered across the gravel. David was shot in the head at close range while exiting the car, his body collapsing near the rear wheel. Betty Lou fled. She ran. But she didn't get far. 5 bullets struck her in the back. The scene was silent when a passing motorist stumbled upon the horror. 2 lifeless bodies, blood darkening the ground. No witnesses, no leads. There was no robbery, no known motive. The killer had left nothing behind, except fear and questions. The community was stunned. Their children weren't just murdered, they were executed. No one claimed responsibility, not then. But months later, a letter arrived. The Zodiac Killer would take credit. He would turn that remote country road into the first entry in his ledger of terror. The world would come to know his name. But David and Betty Lou would only be remembered as where it began. It was the beginning of a nightmare. 7 months later, the killer returned. It was the 4th of July. Darlene Farron, just 22 years old, was a beloved waitress at Terry's restaurant in Vallejo. Known to her friends and family as Dee, she was vibrant, kind, and full of life. That night, she drove to Blue Rock Springs Park with 19-year-old Michael Majot, a friend. They parked in the darkness, unaware that someone was watching. At 12:10 a.m., headlights appeared behind them. A car pulled in, then pulled away, only to return minutes later. A man stepped out. He approached the driver's side, shining a flashlight into their eyes, then opened fire with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Darlene was hit 9 times. Michael, 4. Somehow, he lived. A few miles away, the phone rang at the Vallejo Police Department. The voice on the other end was flat, cold, and deliberate. "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." goodbye. It was the Zodiac. Darlene was pronounced dead at 12:38 a.m. at Kaiser Foundation Hospital. Investigators searched for answers. Darlene's husband, Dean Farron, was quickly ruled out. He'd been working that night. Her ex-husband was briefly considered, but nothing stuck. Rumors began to swirl. Some said Darlene knew her killer. A mysterious man in a photo, never identified, bore a disturbing resemblance to the Zodiac sketch. On July 31st, the killer confirmed what many feared. In a letter sent to 3 newspapers, he took credit for Darlene's murder and introduced himself to the world as the Zodiac. It was the beginning of his letter-writing campaign, a new chapter of fear, and he wasn't finished. On September 27, 1969, the horror came dressed in black. Cecilia Shepard, 22, and Brian Hartnell, 20, were enjoying a peaceful lakeside afternoon at Lake Berryessa, a serene spot in Napa County. The sun was still up when he appeared, a man in a strange, dark costume. He wore a black, executioner-style hood. On his chest, a white crosshair symbol, the same one that had begun to haunt newspaper headlines. In one hand, a gun. In the other, rope. He told them he was an escaped convict, that he needed their car, their money, their cooperation. He spoke calmly, deliberately, as if reading from a script. Then, he bound them both. First Cecilia, then Brian, and then he attacked. Brian was stabbed 6 times in the back. Cecilia, 12. She remained conscious long enough to describe her attacker to police. She told Deputy Dave Collins everything she could about the hood, the calm voice, the symbol. She was rushed to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa, but the damage was too great. She slipped into a coma on the way. 2 days later, she died. Cecilia's autopsy revealed a brutal truth. The wounds were concentrated on her left side. She had likely been lying on her stomach. 3 of the 12 knife wounds were deemed secondary, meaning the killer struck with such force that earlier injuries reopened again and again. Brian survived, playing dead until help arrived. His testimony would become one of the clearest windows into the Zodiac's behavior. Cecilia was a student at the University of California, Riverside. Originally from Loma Linda, she had her whole life ahead of her. Some have even speculated a link between her and another Zodiac-adjacent case, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, due to their shared ties to Riverside. After stabbing the couple, the killer walked to Brian's car. Using a black felt pen, he drew his symbol on the door and listed the dates of his previous attacks. Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs. Now, Lake Berryessa was part of that list. The costume, the signature, the ritual. This wasn't just a murder, it was theater. 2 weeks later, the killer changed his pattern entirely. He came to the city. On October 11th, 1969, Paul Stein was working his regular night shift as a cab driver in San Francisco. At 29 years old, he was more than just a cabbie. He was a part-time insurance agent and a dedicated student at San Francisco State College, working toward a PhD in English. To fund his education, he drove a taxi from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. That night, it would cost him everything. Sometime before 10 p.m., Paul picked up a passenger near the theater on Geary Street. The man requested to be taken to Washington and Maple in the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. But for reasons still unknown, the cab stopped a block short, at Washington and Cherry. At 9:55 p.m., Paul was shot in the head at point-blank range with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. 3 children across the street witnessed the murder from their window. They saw the killer lean over Paul, handling his body. Then they saw him exit the car, calmly wipe down the interior and exterior, and tear a piece of Paul's shirt before walking into the night. Officers arrived to find Paul's body slumped in the front seat of his Ford Galaxy. The taxi meter read $6.25. Bloody fingerprints were discovered on the door. It looked nothing like the Zodiac's previous crimes. This wasn't a lover's lane. This wasn't a rural road. This was the heart of the city. 2 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter. Inside was the missing piece, literally, a scrap of Paul Stine's bloody shirt, sent as proof. "I am the murderer of the taxi driver," the Zodiac wrote. The message was unmistakable. This was a declaration of escalation. The murder of Paul Stine broke every pattern. He was alone. He was male. The setting was urban, the time early in the evening. It was a shift in the Zodiac's ritual, and a message to law enforcement that nowhere was safe. Paul left behind a wife, a brother, his parents, and friends. He had dreams. He had a future. But that night, he picked up a passenger who wanted infamy more than a ride. And with that final confirmed kill, the Zodiac vanished once more into legend. The Zodiac had a message. He would kill again and again until he had enough slaves for the afterlife. He claimed 37 victims. Only 5 are confirmed. What followed was a campaign of terror, not through action, but through words. 4 cryptic ciphers, dozens of letters, taunts, threats, boasts. His letters were riddled with spelling errors, strange symbols, and chilling fantasies. He spoke of rebirth, of being a god in the afterlife, of slaves serving him in eternity. The madness wasn't hidden. It was embraced. He demanded his letters be published, or he would bomb a school bus. And the media obeyed. Newspapers complied. Fear spread. Every child became a potential target. Every cipher became a desperate puzzle. Schools added security. Parents kept their kids home. The killer had achieved what he wanted. Terror. Law enforcement scrambled to find a name behind the symbol. They had a suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher, a convicted child molester, a man who lived near several of the crime scenes. When Michael Mageau, the surviving victim from Blue Rock Springs, was shown a photo lineup, he identified Allen as looking most like the man who shot him. Allen owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch. On its face, the now infamous crosshair symbol. His psychological profile fit. His background raised alarms. Handwriting experts noted similarities between his writing and that of the Zodiac letters. But nothing ever stuck. Search warrants turned up nothing conclusive. His fingerprints didn't match, nor did his DNA. In 1992, Arthur Lee Allen died of a heart attack without ever being charged. Other names surfaced, each wrapped in their own web of eerie coincidences. Lawrence Kane, identified by Kathleen Johns, who claimed the Zodiac abducted her in 1970. He resembled the composite sketch. He had a history of brain trauma and impulse control issues. He worked near a possible Zodiac victim, Donna Lass, but no solid evidence linked him. Richard Gaikowski, a journalist with a voice that matched the one police dispatcher, Nancy Slover, remembered from her chilling call with the Zodiac. He lived near murder scenes. Some believe he even attended Paul Stine's funeral, but law enforcement dismissed him. Earl Van Best Jr., accused by his own son in a book titled The Most Dangerous Animal of All. He bore a striking resemblance to the sketch and shared a name with the Zodiac's alleged anagram signature. But the claims didn't hold under forensic scrutiny. Gary Francis Post, in 2021, a team called the Casebreakers named him the Zodiac, claiming DNA evidence. His appearance matched. His background was violent, but authorities haven't confirmed the findings. Louis Joseph Myers allegedly confessed on his deathbed, but the confession came through a friend, and no evidence supported the claim. Paul Doerr, named in a theory based on literary patterns and circumstantial clues. It was compelling on paper, but lacked proof. And then there's the most radical theory of all, that the Zodiac was a hoax, not a single killer, but a construct, a media-fueled fiction, a performance in 4 parts. Despite decades of scrutiny, none of these theories have solved the case. Every name, every clue, every promising lead, all of them ended the same way, in silence. Even the ciphers became legendary. The Z408 was cracked early on, revealing chilling lines about the thrill of murder. But the Z340 took decades to solve, and the Z32, still unsolved, still a taunt, a final riddle left hanging in the air. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a puppeteer, and everyone, police, media, the public, was a string. They weren't just letters, they were puzzles, weapons in the form of symbols. The Zodiac Killer sent 4 main ciphers during his reign of terror, each one a deeper descent into madness. The first, known as Z408, arrived on July 31st, 1969. 408 symbols spread across 3 letters sent to 3 different newspapers. It didn't take long, just 6 days, before a schoolteacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Harden, cracked the code. What it revealed was chilling. Zodiac wrote that killing was so much fun, and that he was collecting souls for the afterlife. He used a homophonic substitution method, where different symbols could represent the same letter. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Then came Z340, mailed on November 8, 1969. This cipher would become infamous. For 51 years, it stood unbroken, a wall of random characters, resisting every effort to decode it. It wasn't until 2020 that a team of amateur codebreakers finally unlocked its message. And once again, it was a taunt. Zodiac said he wasn't afraid of the gas chamber, that death would only send him to paradise, where he'd be surrounded by his slaves. He never mentioned his name, never revealed his identity, only ego, only dominance. Next was Z13, mailed on April 20th, 1970. Just 13 characters long. He introduced it with the words, "My name is." But the code that followed was indecipherable, too short to solve with certainty, too vague to validate any guesses. Some believe it was never meant to be cracked, just another game, another dead end. Finally, Z32, the so-called map cipher. Sent on June 26, 1970, it contained a cryptic promise. He claimed to have buried a bomb that would detonate in the fall. The code was supposed to lead to its location, but the cipher remains unsolved. No bomb was ever found. To this day, Z13 and Z32 defy every effort to break them. Not because the tools don't exist, but because the data is too small, too unstable, like a lock without a keyhole. Some experts believe Zodiac made them unsolvable on purpose, not to reveal anything, but to consume time, to force investigators to stare at symbols while he disappeared into the fog. The ciphers became part of his myth, a serial killer who didn't just kill, but outwitted, outlasted. They weren't messages. They were monuments to his arrogance, his cruelty, and his obsession with control. Even the ciphers became legendary. 2 victims survived. Michael Mageau was just 19 when he was gunned down alongside Darlene Ferrin at Blue Rock Springs. Though seriously wounded, shot in the jaw, shoulder, and leg, he managed to survive. His description of the killer was one of the first clues investigators received. A heavy-set man, around 5 feet 8 inches, with light brown hair. Years later, Mageau identified Arthur Lee Allen from a photo lineup as the man who most resembled the attacker. Yet despite his eyewitness testimony, no charges were ever brought. Brian Hartnell, attacked at Lake Berryessa, endured 6 stab wounds to his back. He remembered the killer's strange, deliberate manner, the chilling costume, the calm voice that never once broke as he tied them up, threatened them, and began to stab. Hartnell survived by playing dead. His recollections painted a vivid picture of a killer who saw the act as performance, ritualistic, methodical. Both men carried their trauma for decades. Mageau faded from the public eye. Hartnell, later an attorney, sometimes spoke about the events, his words measured, his tone quiet. Their testimonies kept the investigation alive. They gave faces to the horror, proof that the Zodiac was not a myth. But time passed. Leads dried up. The letters stopped. The killer went silent. Yet the fear never left. Today, more than half a century later, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American history. Books, films, podcasts, documentaries, they all circle the same unanswered question. Who was the Zodiac? Was he a genius? A madman? A figment amplified by the media into something more than human? He named himself. He shaped his identity. And then he vanished. Some say he's dead. Others believe he's still alive, watching the chaos he created echo through generations. Do you think the Zodiac Killer will ever be unmasked? Or has he already won, hiding forever behind the name he gave himself? This is Dead Silence.